The first thing my sister said when she called me wasn't, "I'm sorry," or "Are you okay?" or even "I miss him too." What she said was, "Don't look at the photos." It was 11:30 on a Sunday night, 3 weeks after we buried our father, and Claire's voice had that particular texture to it, the kind that lives just below screaming. I'd heard it once before, when she was 17 and found our dog at the bottom of the backyard ravine. That sound, like something inside her had come loose and was rattling around. "Claire, what are you?" "I'm serious, Daniel. Do not look at the photos from the funeral. Promise me." I looked at my phone screen. 62 missed calls, 43 texts, all from her, all sent between midnight and 11 p.m. tonight, like she'd been trying to reach me for an entire day, and I simply hadn't heard any of it. I'd been at work. I work freight logistics nights mostly, and my phone stays in my locker. That's the job. "Claire, promise me. I don't even have the photos. Mom has she sent them to you this morning, the whole album. Check your email." I walked to my kitchen table and opened my laptop. The screen washed my face in pale blue light. And there it was. An email from my mother sent at 8:17 a.m., subject line reading "Dad's service, for keepsake," with a Google Photos album attached. 112 images. I hadn't opened it. I never open personal emails during a shift. "I'm not going to look at them right now," I said. "Tell me what's wrong." There was a long silence on her end, long enough that I checked the call. Was still connected. "There's someone standing behind the coffin," she whispered. "In every single photo. Every one. Daniel, 112 pictures, and he's in all of them, standing right behind Dad." I closed my laptop. I didn't sleep that night. Let me tell you about my father before I tell you what we found. Because if I don't, none of what comes after will make any sense, and you'll think this is just a ghost story. It isn't. I don't know what it is, but it isn't that. My father's name was Gerald Thomas Marsh. He went by Jerry to everyone who knew him, and he was the kind of man you never forget once you've met him. Not because he was loud or imposing or particularly charming. He was memorable the way certain songs are memorable. Quiet. Steady. The kind of thing that gets into your chest without you realizing it. He worked at the same hardware store on Birchfield Avenue for 26 years. Started as a stock boy at 22 and eventually managed the whole operation. He knew the name of every regular customer, knew which ones were dealing with sick spouses or bad knees or trouble with their kids. He'd stay late to help an elderly woman pick out the right caulking for her bathroom without once making her feel like a burden. That was just who he was. He was diagnosed in February, gone by October. Pancreatic cancer is a particular kind of cruelty. It doesn't announce itself politely. It doesn't give you time to adjust. 1 month, my father was complaining about indigestion at Thanksgiving dinner, and 3 months later, he weighed 140 pounds and couldn't keep water down. The doctors used words like aggressive and advanced, and options are limited in the tone of people who've had to say those words so many times they've learned to hollow them out. He died on a Tuesday, October 14th, at 4:22 in the morning, with my mother holding his left hand and Claire holding his right, and me sitting in the chair beside the window because I couldn't make myself get any closer to what was happening. I've never forgiven myself for that. I don't think I ever will. The funeral was held 3 days later at Devlin & Sons Funeral Home on Meridian Road. Same place that had handled both of my grandparents. Small, quiet building, dark wood, burgundy carpet. That particular smell. I still can't describe it exactly. Sweet and chemical and final. We held it on a Friday evening, immediate family only, the way he'd wanted. My mother, Claire, our Uncle Dennis, 3 cousins I barely recognized as adults, and a handful of my father's oldest friends from the hardware store. Maybe 20 people in total. The room felt large for that many people. Or maybe it just always feels large when the person who used to fill every room is the one lying still inside it. My cousin Renata took most of the photos. She has a good eye. She does photography part-time, weddings and portraits mostly, and she'd brought her good camera, the Canon EOS she talks about like most people talk about their kids. She moved quietly through the viewing, documenting everything the way our family had asked her to. The flowers, the prayer cards, the framed photos we'd arranged on a folding table near the entrance, the coffin, my father. We got through the evening. We said the things people say. We cried the way people cry when someone good leaves the world. Not just sad, but bewildered, because goodness isn't supposed to be temporary. We drove to the cemetery in a procession of 6 cars on a grey October morning, watched them lower my father into the ground, and then we went back to my mother's house and ate the food that neighbours had left on the porch and tried to remember how to exist in a world he wasn't part of. 3 weeks later, my sister called me at 11:30 at night and told me not to open the photos. I opened them anyway. The first image loaded slowly. My laptop is old, and the file was large, and for a moment I just watched the photo render top to bottom like a theatre curtain being drawn. It was a wide shot of the room. Renata must have taken it from near the entrance because you could see the whole layout. The rows of folding chairs, the standing sprays of white lilies, the small podium where Father Connolly would later speak. And there, at the far end of the room, the casket, my father's casket, mahogany, closed lid, the way he'd wanted, and standing directly behind it, a man. I leaned closer to the screen. The figure was dark. Not dark like a shadow, dark like a person wearing dark clothing, standing in a part of the room that didn't have great lighting. He was tall, standing perfectly straight, and he was facing forward toward the camera, toward the rest of the room. You couldn't see his face clearly. The resolution wasn't sharp enough at that distance, but you could see the shape of him, the posture. I told myself it was one of the funeral home staff, one of the Devlin boys maybe. There were 3 of them, all tall, all dark-haired. I told myself Renata had simply caught an employee standing near the casket at an inopportune moment, and it looked strange because the lighting was poor, and grief makes everything look wrong anyway. I clicked to the next photo. He was still there. Same position, same posture, standing directly behind the casket facing forward. This photo had been taken from a different angle. Renata had moved, circled to the left side of the room. The casket was now slightly to the right of center frame, and behind it, the figure stood exactly where he'd been in the first photo, as if he hadn't moved at all. I clicked again and again and again. He was in every single one. Every single one. 22 photos before the viewing even officially began, 41 during, 11 taken at various points throughout the evening. As people arrived, as Father Connolly led the rosary, as my mother stood next to the casket with her hand resting on the lid and her eyes fixed on nothing. In every single one of them, the figure stood directly behind the casket, never moving, never turning away, never blurring the way people blur when they shift or gesture or lean in to speak to someone, just standing. I scrolled back to the beginning and started zooming in. My hands weren't entirely steady, but I got the image magnified enough to see the figure more clearly. And what I noticed, what made me close the laptop and sit in the dark for a long time, was this. No one in any of the photos was looking at him. 20-something people moving through that room over the course of 2 hours, and not a single person, not one, had turned to acknowledge the tall man standing directly behind my father's coffin. Not my mother, not Claire, not Dennis, not Father Connolly. Not the Devlin staff, nobody, like he wasn't there, like only the camera could see him. I called Claire back at 1 in the morning. "How long have you known?" I asked. "Since yesterday. Mom sent me the album at the same time she sent it to you. I was going through them to pick some out for the memorial book and She stopped. I heard her exhale slowly. At first I thought it was one of the funeral home guys, like you're thinking right now. I'm not. You are. I know you, Daniel, but zoom in. Really zoom in. I already did. Silence. Look at his shoes, Claire said. Opened the laptop again. Found the sharpest image I had of the figure. A photo taken from maybe 15 feet away, close enough that the resolution held when I magnified it. I pulled my attention down to the floor. To where his feet should have been, the carpet of the funeral home was that dark burgundy. Old. The kind that had been there long enough to show paths of lighter wear where people walked most often. You could see those worn paths in the photo. They ran through the figure. The worn tracks in the carpet ran directly through where he was standing, as if he were standing on top of them, not pressing them down, not disturbing them, just existing in the same space without making contact with anything. I made a sound. I'm not sure what kind of sound. Something small and involuntary. Yeah, Claire said quietly. That's what I did too. We decided not to tell our mother. That sounds like a terrible decision, and maybe it was, but you have to understand. My mother had just buried the man she'd been married to for 37 years. She was sleeping 12 hours a day and barely eating and jumping at the sound of her own phone ringing. She did not need to know that something had been standing behind Gerald Marsh's coffin for the entire duration of his viewing. What she needed was time. What Claire and I needed was answers. My first call the next morning was to the Devlin funeral home. I spoke to a woman named Patricia at the front desk and asked, as calmly as I could manage, whether any of their staff members had been standing near the casket during my father's viewing on October 17th. Of course, she said, with the practiced warmth of someone who'd been handling grieving families for decades. We always have at least one staff member near the casket during viewings. It's standard procedure. Do you know who it was specifically? Who was on duty that evening? I'd have to check the schedule. Can I ask what this is regarding? I told her we had some photos from the service and wanted to make sure we knew everyone in them. She put me on hold. I spent 3 minutes listening to something that was almost classical music but slightly too slow, like someone had adjusted the tempo without understanding why it mattered. Mr. Marsh, she came back on. Our records show that Michael Devlin was on duty for your father's service, along with a part-time attendant named Sean Lowe. Would you like their contact information? Can you describe them, their general appearance? A pause, not a long one. Michael is, he's in his mid-50s, average height, grey hair. Sean is younger, early 20s on the shorter side, red hair. Neither of them were tall, neither of them were dark. I thanked her and hung up. Claire had meanwhile been doing her own digging. She'd gone back through every photo with the kind of systematic attention she usually applied to her accounting work. She's a CPA, my sister Precise, and methodical in a way I've always admired and occasionally found exhausting. She created a spreadsheet. She logged every image that contained the figure, noted the timestamp embedded in each file's metadata, tracked his position relative to the casket across all 112 images. His position never changed. Not by a single inch. In photos taken an hour apart, the figure stood in exactly the same spot with exactly the same posture. While people moved around him, while chairs were rearranged, while the flower arrangements were adjusted, while the lights were dimmed for the rosary, he stood behind the casket like something that had always been there and would always be there and didn't know how to be anywhere else. There's something else, Claire told me when she called that evening. Her voice had a particular flatness to it, the tone of someone reporting information they haven't fully processed yet. I found a photo I missed the first time through. Renata took it early, before anyone else arrived. The room was basically empty. I'm just Mom standing near the entrance and the casket and the flowers. And he's in it. He's in it. But in this one, he's not behind the casket. I waited. He's standing next to it, Claire said. Right next to it. And his hand, Daniel, his hand is resting on the lid. I asked her to send me that photo separately, isolated from the rest of the album. It came through on my phone a minute later. I looked at it for a long time. The figure was clearer in this one, closer to the camera. And Claire was right. His right hand was resting flat on the lid of my father's casket, with the particular stillness of something that had been placed there deliberately. But what made me set my phone face down on the table and sit with my hands pressed flat against my thighs, trying to breathe evenly, wasn't the hand. It was the fact that in this photo, closer, clearer, better resolution, I could see the figure's face, or rather, I could see that it wasn't quite a face. It was the right shape, the right proportions. 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, arranged in the correct configuration. But the features were wrong in a way that's almost impossible to explain, like a face assembled from the memory of a face, rather than from an actual face. Like someone had described what a human face looks like to something that had never seen one, and this was the result. I turned the phone back over. I zoomed in as far as the image would allow, and in the fraction of a second before the pixels broke apart entirely, I was almost certain that the figure was looking directly into the camera, not at the room, not at the coffin, not at my mother standing near the entrance with her back turned, at whoever would eventually look at this photo. At me. I want to tell you about the night I drove to Meridian Road. It was a Wednesday, 3.5 weeks after the funeral. I don't know what I expected to find at an empty funeral home at 11 p.m., and if you'd asked me before I got in the car, I wouldn't have been able to explain why I felt compelled to go. I just needed to see the room. I needed to stand in the space where it had stood and understand something about the geography of it, whether there was a corner or a doorway or something structural that explained how a person could stand in that spot for hours without being noticed. The Devlin building was dark when I got there, the parking lot empty. I sat in my car for a few minutes watching the building, and then I got out and walked to the front door on the off chance that it wasn't locked. It wasn't. I learned later that the Devlins kept the side entrance unlocked during evening hours for families who needed to make last-minute arrangements. A small-town courtesy that I'm sure has never once caused them any trouble. I'm also sure they'd have reconsidered it if they'd known I was going to use it to walk into an empty funeral home at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday. The interior was exactly as I remembered it. Dark wood, burgundy carpet, that smell. The lights in the hallway were on a dim nighttime setting, low and yellowish enough to see by, but not enough to feel comfortable. I made my way down the corridor and pushed open the door to the main viewing room. It was empty. Obviously, the folding chairs were stacked against the wall. The podium had been moved. The sprays of white lilies were long gone. But the room was the same room. I walked to the far end to the spot where the casket had stood. There were slight indentations in the carpet where the legs had rested. I could see them in the low light. 4 shallow impressions in the pile. I stepped around them and positioned myself behind where the casket had been, facing back toward the entrance the way the figure in the photos had been facing. The room stretched out in front of me, empty chairs along the walls, the podium, the hallway entrance beyond. I stood there for a moment, trying to feel whatever I thought I might feel, and then the lights went out. Not all at once, in sequence. The hallway lights first, then the low fixtures along the walls of the viewing room, one by one from the entrance toward me, like something walking toward me and blocking each light as it passed. I didn't move. The last fixture above me clicked off. Complete darkness. And in that darkness, not imagined, not a sound my frightened brain invented, I heard breathing. It was not mine. I left the building. I'm not going to dress it up. I ran. I don't know exactly what happened in the moments between the last light going out and me being in my car with the engine running and the headlights flooding the parking lot. But somewhere in there, I moved faster than I have in my entire adult life, and I am not embarrassed about that. I sat in my car for a long time, long enough that the cold crept in through the door seals and I started shaking, though I wasn't entirely sure if that was the temperature or something else. My phone rang. "Claire, are you okay?" she said immediately. How did you know to call right now? I've been calling you for 20 minutes. Your phone was going to voicemail. I looked at my screen. She was right. There was a line of missed calls I hadn't felt vibrating because my hands were shaking. I'm fine, I said, and even I could hear that it wasn't convincing. Daniel, where are you? I looked up at the dark building in front of me. I went to the funeral home. Silence. Then, why? I needed to see the room. And I didn't answer for a moment. Claire, did Dad ever mention anyone to you? Anyone strange? Someone from the store? Someone he might have had a problem with? Anyone? No, she said. You know, Dad, he didn't have enemies. I know. I found something today, she said. The flatness was back in her voice, that accountant's tone. Something in the photos that I want to show you. Can you come over? Tonight? Tonight. Claire lives 20 minutes from me, on the other side of town, in the kind of neighborhood where the houses are all slightly too close together and the yards are small but immaculately maintained. She had every light in the house on when I pulled into her driveway, which told me she was more scared than she was letting on. She had her laptop open on the kitchen table with the photos already loaded when I came in. She poured me coffee without asking. I sat down and looked at the screen. I've been going through family photos, she said, sitting down across from me. Old ones. Mom has them all scanned and in the cloud. You know how she is. Everything organized. I did know. My mother is the family archivist. Decades of Christmases and birthdays and vacations and ordinary Sundays, all catalogued and backed up. I went back 7 years, Claire said, looking for something. She reached over and clicked, the screen filled with a photo I recognized. Christmas, 7 years ago, Dad at the head of the table with his ridiculous paper crown slightly askew, laughing at something. Our mother beside him. Claire and I across from them. An ordinary Christmas photo, the kind that makes your chest ache when you look at it now. And in the background, visible through the doorway to the living room behind my father. A figure, standing in the dark of the living room. Same height, same posture, same darkness. My coffee cup made a sound against the table as I set it down. How many? I asked. 14 years. Claire said quietly. I found him in photos going back 14 years, Daniel. Birthday parties, Thanksgiving, the 4th of July. That summer we all went to the lake house in 2015. He's in the background of at least 3 photos from that trip. 14 years, I repeated because I needed to hear it out loud. Always in the background, always near Dad. She paused. He started showing up in photos around the time Dad first started having stomach problems, back before anyone thought it was serious. I took a breath. You're saying he's been following him for... I'm saying he's been with him, Claire said. There's a difference. She clicked through the photos slowly. Christmas after Christmas, summer after summer, birthday after birthday, and in the edges and backgrounds and dark doorways of everyone, the figure. Standing, watching, always near my father, always facing the camera that would eventually find him. I showed Mom, Claire said. I looked up sharply. You said we weren't going to. I know what I said, but I had to. I had to show her. And Claire wrapped both hands around her coffee mug, stared at it for a moment. When she looked up at me, her eyes were careful, measured. Like she was choosing her next words with the same precision she used for everything else. She wasn't surprised, Claire said. My mother lives 40 minutes north of town, in the house, where Claire and I grew up. It's a 2-story colonial on a quiet street with a big backyard that my father kept in the kind of meticulous order that you only maintain when you genuinely love something. After he got sick, the yard got away from him a little. By October, it had gone mostly to seed. He'd felt bad about that. I know because he mentioned it, apologized for it actually, the way people apologize for things that aren't their fault. We drove out on a Thursday morning. both of us. The drive was quiet except for the radio, which Claire had on low, tuned to a station playing the kind of soft rock throwbacks that my father used to hum along to without realizing he was doing it. My mother was waiting in the kitchen. She'd made coffee and set out a plate of the Italian cookies she buys from the bakery on Route 9, the almond ones, which she only puts out when there's something worth sitting down for. She looked tired but alert, like she'd been preparing for this conversation. We sat down. "You saw the photos," she said. "Mom," Claire started. "All of them? The old ones too?" "Yes." My mother nodded slowly. She picked up her mug and sat down without drinking from it. Then she said, "Your grandfather used to call it a companion." Neither of us spoke. His father's people had a word for it in Italian, but I don't remember the word. A companion. Something that comes to a person who's going to die and stays with them until it's time. She looked at the table. "Not something bad. Your grandfather was very clear about that. He said it wasn't something to be afraid of." "Mom," I said, and I heard the way my voice came out. Careful, like I was handling something fragile. "You knew this thing was in the photos?" "I didn't look at photos when Daddy was alive. Not closely, not in the backgrounds." She lifted her eyes to mine. "After he passed, when I was going through everything, I started to see it. And then Claire called me." "When did you call her?" I looked at my sister. "A week ago," Claire said. "Before I called you." I sat with that for a moment. "You've both been talking about this for a week without telling me." "I needed to show Mom the old photos first," Claire said. "I needed to know if she'd recognize." "Did you?" I asked my mother. "Recognize it?" My mother was quiet for a long moment. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, a bird moved through the bare branches of the maple tree in the backyard. "When your grandfather was dying," she said finally, "there was a man at his bedside, at the very end. Nobody knew who he was. He was just there. And then when it was over, he wasn't." She looked out the window. "Your father's mother said not to ask about him, said it was better not to." "And Dad?" I asked. "Did Dad know?" My mother set down her mug. "Your father," she said slowly. 3 weeks before he passed, he woke up one night, middle of the night. I was right there beside him, the way I was every night by then, and he woke up and he looked toward the corner of the room and he smiled." She stopped. "He smiled," I repeated. "Like he recognized someone," she said. "Like running into an old friend." She folded her hands on the table. "He went back to sleep. He never mentioned it, and I never asked." I drove home alone that afternoon while Claire stayed with our mother. I've thought about what I'm going to tell you next many times since it happened. I've gone back and forth about whether to include it, whether it changes the nature of what I've shared with you, whether it matters to the story I've been telling. I've decided it does. I've decided it's the whole point. When I got home, I opened my laptop and went back to the photos. All of them. But this time, I wasn't looking at the figure. I was looking at my father. I scrolled through all 112 images from the funeral. Every angle, every moment of that evening. My father in his casket, his hands folded, his face finally free of the terrible tension that pain had put there in his last weeks. And in the photos where the figure's hand was resting on the lid, the early ones before the viewing officially began, I looked at the casket more carefully than I had before. More carefully than I'd been able to before, because every time I'd looked, my attention had gone straight to the figure. There was something on the lid. I'd mistaken it before for a shadow, or for a trick of the low light. But now, magnified, I could see what it was. A handprint, pressed into the polished wood, the kind of print that appears on a clean surface when someone has touched it with a warm, living hand. 5 fingers, palm heel, the whole impression. But on the inside, it was on the inside of the lid. I called Claire. She picked up on the first ring. The handprint on the casket, I said. Did you see it? Silence. Claire. Yes, she said. I saw it. When? 2 weeks ago. And you didn't... I didn't know what to do with it, Daniel. Her voice cracked just slightly and then steadied itself. I didn't know how to say it. I didn't know if it was what I thought it was. I pressed my back against the kitchen wall and slid down until I was sitting on the floor. My legs had simply stopped wanting to hold me up. It's from the inside, I said. I know. That means I know what it means. We stayed on the phone together for a long time without saying anything. I could hear her breathing, the sound of her television in the background, whatever she'd had on before I called. Ordinary sounds, the sounds of a world that was still mostly sensible, mostly explainable, mostly the world I'd grown up understanding. Do you think he was afraid? I finally asked. And I meant it the way I think Claire understood. I meant it. Not was he afraid of the thing in the photos, but was he afraid of what came after, of the transition, of whatever was waiting on the other side of October 14th at 4:22 in the morning. Claire was quiet for a moment. I think he smiled at it, she said. 3 weeks before. I think he saw it in the corner of the room and he recognized it and he smiled. I thought about that. About my father waking in the dark of his bedroom, wasted and exhausted and diminished by what the cancer had done to him, and seeing something in the corner that made him smile the way you smile at an old friend. Something that had been with him for 14 years. Longer maybe. Long before anyone knew he was sick. Something that had been present at every Christmas, every birthday, every summer at the lake. In the background of his life, patient and constant and always watching, waiting for whatever moment it had been waiting for, and in his last weeks it had stepped forward, closed the distance, let itself be seen. The handprint, I said. Yeah. It wasn't the figure that made it, I said, and I knew this, the way you sometimes simply know things that you can't entirely justify. It was Dad. Claire said nothing. He was saying goodbye, I said. From the other side, while we were all in the room and while Mom was crying and Father Connolly was saying the rosary and I was sitting in the corner because I couldn't make myself get close enough, he was right there. He was right there the whole time. And then Claire started crying. Not quietly. The way you cry when something cracks open all at once, when grief and relief and bewilderment all arrive at the same moment and there is no ordered way to feel them. I sat on my kitchen floor and listened to my sister cry, and I didn't try to stop her or calm her down or say anything at all, because some moments don't have words for them, and this was one of them. We have not deleted the photos. We've talked about it more than once. There are moments, usually late at night, usually when I've been looking at the album longer than I should, when I want to delete them badly enough that I have to close the laptop and walk away. Not because they frighten me anymore exactly, but because looking at them makes me feel something complicated, something that lives in the territory between grief and wonder, between fear and something else that I don't have a better word for than grateful. Because here is the thing that I keep coming back to, the thing that my mother said, and that I didn't fully hear until days later, sitting with it in the way you sometimes have to sit with things before they resolve into meaning. She said it wasn't something bad. Her grandfather's people had a word for it, a word she couldn't remember. A companion. Something that comes to a person who's going to die and stays with them until it's time. My father was not alone. For 14 years at minimum, perhaps longer, perhaps since the very beginning, something accompanied him. Through the ordinary Tuesdays and the hardware store and the immaculate backyard and the 37 years of marriage. Through the diagnosis and the treatment and the weight loss and the hospice and the long October nights when pain made sleep impossible. Through all of it, something was present. Something was bearing witness. We just couldn't see it. The camera could... I've thought a lot about what it means that the figure was always facing the camera, always looking at whoever would eventually look at the photo, whether it was coincidence if that word means anything in this context, or something intentional, like it wanted to be known, like it was offering evidence for those who would eventually look closely enough that no one makes this journey alone. I want to believe that. On most days, I manage to believe it. On other days, I think about the breathing in the funeral home on Meridian Road, the sequence of lights going out, one by one, like something moving through the dark toward where I stood. And I think about the fact that my father had been sick for nearly a year before anyone realized it, and I wonder how much earlier the companion arrived, whether it had been in the background of photos I haven't looked at yet, whether it had been there since we were children, whether it's in any photos of me. I haven't looked. I'm not sure I want to. But sometimes, late at night, when the apartment is quiet and the only light is the blue glow of my phone screen, I'll pull up a photo, something recent, my sister and me at a diner last month, taken by the waitress because we asked her to. My mother in her backyard in the spring, the maple tree in the background, the yard starting to grow back. I'll look at the background carefully, all the dark edges and shadows and spaces where the light doesn't reach. And every time I do, I tell myself there's nothing there. I tell myself I'm not looking hard enough. My father was a good man. He kept his word. He remembered everyone's name. He stayed late to help an elderly woman pick out corking and never once made her feel like a burden. Whatever came for him, I hope it knew that. I hope that's why it stayed.